Good morning, class. So today we are going to be learning about short stories and how to tell a short story. Today we're going to start off by just doing something a little fun and listening to watching a short story on YouTube. I'm only going to show a couple minutes for the actual recording, but it's a 6 minute and 45 second. It's almost a 7 minute video. But yeah, let's start out.
Her name was Emma.
Also, sorry, my dog's in the background and she's whining because she's in her kennel.
She was sleeping in the bedroom.
Yeah.
It was a cold and dark night. It was raining. A thief came into Emma's house at midnight. He wanted to steal Emma's toothbrush. The thief went into the kitchen first. He felt hungry. He decided to eat something. Then he started to prepare a breakfast for himself. He made some noise, so Emma woke up. She heard the noise. She was scared. She took her phone and called the police. Then she walked towards the kitchen slowly. And she saw the thief. He was having breakfast. They looked at each other. And they cried, "Ah!"
Hello, are you enjoying the story? Please give us a like.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to end the story there for the sake of recording. But basically, as you guys could see in the short story that we just watched, what's something that you noticed about the tense of the story, like how it was being told? Yes, and what tense it was being told in. It was being told in past tense. That's because a story is something that has already happened. So whenever you're telling a story, whether it's a short story or a long story, it has to be, for the most part, in past tense because you're recounting or retelling something that has already happened. So the majority, basically every time you're telling a story, it's in past tense because it's happened in the past. So that's a good and important thing to remember when you're telling a story, to make sure that you're speaking in the past tense. I was, they went to, she liked this, she lied about that, you know? So, just to give you, I'm gonna just tell a short story right now, and it's gonna be just from my memory, the story of David and Goliath from the Bible. So many of you know of this story already, most likely, but it's the story of David and Goliath. It's in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and it's the story of a young man named David who was a shepherd boy, and he watched his sheep and guarded his sheep every day. And there was a battle going on in his country, the country of Israel. And the king was wanting somebody to come and fight their enemies because there was this big giant named Goliath who no one could defeat, and the whole Israelite army was so afraid of. And so David one day was going to visit his brothers and bring them food because his brothers were in the army, and he saw this giant come out, and he was mocking God, the God of Israel, God of David. And so David was very shocked at this, and he did not like seeing that. And so he told the king that he would go and fight and kill this giant, Goliath. And so because he wasn't afraid of Goliath, he had more fear of God than he had of this giant. And he wanted to defend his God. He wanted to defend God because this giant was saying bad things about him and saying bad things about Israel. And so David went and picked up 5 stones, and he had a sling, which is a kind of like, it's like, it's something that they used to use back then to like a slingshot. So how you see them nowadays is kind of like it's like a rope and a stick, and not a rope, a piece of fabric or something like a rubber band. And I did not think about that part of the story before I told it. But it's a rope, and you pull it back, and it releases, and it hits something. So he took a stone and his sling, and he hit the giant in the forehead. He swung his sling around and hit the giant, and the rock hit him right in the middle of his forehead, so he fell down and died. And the Israelites were all happy, and the enemies of Israel and of God ran away, and the Israelites won that battle. So that is the story of David and Goliath. It wasn't that short of a story. We're going to be working on a little bit on stories that are a little bit shorter, but I just wanted to tell that story today, just as kind of an example of a short story and summarizing a story, because that story is a lot longer in and of itself, but you can summarize and you can shorten stories to make them shorter. So in order to practice this, what we are going to be doing is playing a game called Two Truths and a Lie. So Two Truths and a Lie is usually played a little bit differently than how we are going to be playing it today. Normally you just say a phrase, like I hate apples or something like that. So basically the game is you tell 2 true things about yourself or someone else, or just 2 true facts, but we're going to do stories. So you're going to tell 2 true stories and 1 false story. 1 story that is a lie that you've made up right on the spot, but it's a story. So, and don't do it in that order, because we're going to try and figure out which story is true and which story is not true. So yes, so the way this game works is you tell 2 true stories and 1 story that's a lie, in whichever order you want to do it. So we're just going to make it a short story. I'm going to give a few examples of myself. So I'm going to tell 3 short stories, and this is just going to kind of give you guys an example of how you should do it. So you guys are going to write out your stories first. If you want to, you don't need to write it out completely word for word. Actually, please don't do that. What I would like you to do, though, is write bullet points or notes, things that are going to help you remember what story you want to say. You can just say it off the bat without writing anything down. That's also fine. But I think it would be helpful to write maybe notes or some sort of bullet point to help you remember the story that you want to tell. I'll go first. And while I'm telling these stories, I'm going to tell 3 short stories. And I want you guys to write number 1, number 2, number 3, write on your notebook. And in the story, write down 1 word or 1 small little phrase that will help you remember the story. Because there's so many times where I've played this game, 2 Truths and a Lie, and you're always like, oh man, what was the first story again? What was the second story? What was the third? Because you're trying to figure out which one might be the lie. So just write down, as I tell the story, write down a phrase next to number 1. That's going to help you remember what was in the first story. A phrase or just a 1 word. So my first story number 1, is when I was, okay, the age doesn't matter, but when I was at Word of Life Bible Institute, I went to Israel for my spring break, and I got to ride a camel on the Mount of Olives. So that is the first story number 1. Story number 2 is when I was in high school, I went cliff jumping in Senegal, where I live here. I went cliff jumping here, and I knocked out my breath when I jumped into the water. And story number 3 is when I was 10 years old, I was climbing up a tree, and I fell down and broke my arm. So that's number 3. So each of these short stories are are kind of like what I want you guys to do. You don't have to make them all about yourself, but like I'm just used to playing the game that way. But for the sake of short stories, we can do it differently. You can make it about somebody else or about a fact you know, or just whatever short story you want to make it about. So you guys can go ahead now and vote. Who thinks the first one was false, a lie? Who thinks the second one was? Who thinks the third one was? Okay, great. Yes, so it's actually the third one's a lie. I did not break an arm. The only bone I've ever broken was my collarbone. Okay, so I want you guys to go ahead and take some time to think about the stories you want to do. Either write words next to some sort of notes next to your notebook just to remember. Please don't write out the whole story. And then we'll go with whoever wants to go first. So, okay, one by one, and we are going to have to try and guess what story is true and what story is not true. Okay, cool. Wow, you guys did a great job with that. Really, really great job. So, tomorrow we are going to go over your stories a little bit more, just to go more into detail and how you can better your story, or if you were not saying everything in the tenses that you should have been saying it in. We're going to go over that a little bit tomorrow. I also just wanted to mention some things about like cultural differences about like telling a truth and telling a lie in Senegal versus the United States. So I've noticed, having grown up here, that here in Senegal, it is a lot more common to hear people telling a lie or to tell a lie, and it's more culturally acceptable. In the US, though, that is not acceptable, and it is not, it's not really something that is super common, or you're seen as more of like a dishonest person if you, it's not an acceptable thing. Whereas here in Senegal, that is more of an acceptable thing and something that I've noticed over the years of being here. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think that's a little bit interesting or something to think about. So we're going to be working more on short stories and going into more detail, but I just wanted to kind of like introduce it in this way and play that fun little game of two truths and a lie. So I hope you guys had fun today, and see you tomorrow.